Our next session will look at different examples of collaboration through the lens of design, including unusual or challenging collaborations within and beyond the sector. So can I welcome first to the stage Sadie Morgan, OBE, co-founder of dRMM and chair of the Quality of Life Foundation.
Hi, good afternoon. It's always a disaster when you follow a story like that. But I'm really looking forward to our conversation this afternoon. And mainly because I think the theme of this year's London Design Biennale, remapping collaborations, resonates really strongly, not only with my practice, but it embodies an approach that I have been committed to advocating for. Collaboration is central to how design can make meaningful impact to people's lives. Collaboration between professionals, between clients and designers, between designers and end users, as well as the collaborative links between the different roles one person can employ in their own practice. Design is about problem solving. It's about finding the most creative, efficient, and useful way to join the many disparate dots we need to create a framework for living. In my own work, collaboration is crucial. Everything links, and each one of my roles has influenced the other. The experience of every lecture room I visit to meet with students has impact on the conversations I have at board meetings for national policy and development. Advocacy filters into advocacy. Well, advocacy filters into advisory. The idea of remapping collaborations is not just about how we make connections with our peers and colleagues, it's also about how we can marry knowledge and bring value from one area of our practice into another, eventually ensuring that lessons we've gained can manifest as something real and beneficial in the built environment. And it starts with people. 25 years ago, I founded a practice with Alex de Rijker and Philip Marsh on a shared desire to make architecture that was sustainable and socially useful. The way we work and the qualities we're drawn to are around the people who form part of our team, and they directly reflect on the work of our architecture. We are conscientiously playful. We're cleverly and with great care for the world and people around us. We think about how we collaborate as a whole. We have 21 nationalities in a studio of 55 people. And it's the culture of that studio that is not only inclusive, but aims to lift individuals up, shine light on their unique qualities, talents, and personalities. And I share this with you because I believe that as designers and architects, we build as we are. We build manifestations of the people that we are. If we're joyful, if we're happy, if we feel fulfilled, that's how our buildings feel. I'm a really strong advocate of that. And you know, it goes back really early into one of the first projects we ever did, Kingsdale School. We took what was called a sync school with work from the Architecture Foundation. We looked at how design could change the lives of students. Could good design take what was at that time a sync school and make it better performing? Well, within 3 years of the work that we did at Kingsdale, the school came out of special measures and became the best performing school in Southwark. And that was about collaboration with those students. It was about talking to those students and their families and the teachers and the community around, and understanding that it was important not to knock that school down, not to show some pride in that building and rebuild it, which is something that we did. And this is a picture of 2 decades later of the school still being used for community use. Hastings Pier, I think, is probably a project that exemplifies putting people at the heart of the design process. 9 years of love, energy, and money was thrown into that project by us. But over that time, we consulted with pretty much everybody, it felt like, in Hastings, the outcome of which was an understanding that we couldn't fulfill everybody's expectations, and that actually what was needed was a peer that was able to hold and manage everybody's desires by becoming a place for congregation, a place where people could meet, and a place where activities could take place. And I show you the next film because when we were shortlisted for the Sterling Prize, we felt that it was not right for us to go to the posh dinner at Grosvenor House Hotel, but it was important for us to invite the whole of Hastings. That's basically what we did. We invited the whole of Hastings, and the BBC came, and we absolutely didn't know if we'd won or not. And this might be a bit long. This is me looking very, very tense. So it was extraordinary. It was extraordinary because that collaboration and co-design that had taken us to what was an exemplar building that won us the Sterling Prize was really because we collaborated so strongly with the people around us. This is that was a picture of Maggie's, which in the same way has that same level of community collaboration. But I also want to talk to you a little bit about the work that I've been doing in government. So the National Infrastructure Commission, I was made a commissioner in 2015, and it became really clear that infrastructure was devoid of real design intelligence. There wasn't enough design intelligence when it came to building our infrastructure. We weren't involved. And one of the first things that I did when I was at the commission was to set up a design group to say it's important that designers are involved in our infrastructure. It's important that we take design seriously when we're designing our national infrastructure. We put together a design group. We set out principles for all infrastructure of national significance, which was put in the National Infrastructure Strategy, and government approved those recommendations to say that all infrastructure of national significance should be subject to design review, and all infrastructure of national significance should have a design director at board level, so a non-executive director at board. And the importance of that is to say that we have to have that level of creative thinking at board level. We have to have creative thinkers, not just politicians, not just engineers, not just economists. We need to be there at the table in order to make sure that we are embedding good design and embedding not only good design, but doing that in a way that is inclusive, that is reflective of the people who not only work and are affected by our infrastructure, but that will be using it too. So alongside the design group, when I talk about diversity and inclusion, we also have to think about the next generation. And one of the things that we did at the National Infrastructure Commission was to set up what was called the next generation, the young professionals panel. Because I'm the youngest commissioner, and what we do is advise government on 30 years time in our national infrastructure. So we advise government on 1.1 to 1.2% of GDP. So a lot of your taxpayers' money, well, not those of you who come from abroad, but it's a lot of money. And I'm the youngest commissioner. I'm going to be dead probably in 30 years' time. So how do we ensure that the right people are having the right kinds of conversations? Well, you ask the next generation who don't normally have that opportunity. We had 12 places. We advertised for a place on the commission. We had over 500 young people apply. And this advert went out on gov.co.uk, which, trust me, very few people look at. So the extraordinary response just showed me how important it is for us to include and talk about our young people. And there are so many young people doing incredible work around making sure that those voices are diverse and inclusive. At High Speed 2, I run something called the Independent Design Panel 40 incredible designers who are there to help and assist HS2 make sure they deliver on their design vision, to make sure that we are not building our infrastructure in a way that doesn't work for people, but that we are building and inspiring the next generation in terms of the infrastructure that we build from start to finish, inclusively for everybody. And we, at the design panel, we don't just talk about architecture, we talk about landscape. We advise on the website design, the branding, the train design, the interiors, everything. And it's been the most extraordinary journey. And we do that by encouraging HS2 and similar organisations to visualise their procurement documents. So what happens in big infrastructure is that you have a list of recommendations that you give over to a contractor, and they come back with the absolute lowest common denominator that they think that looks like. So what we said we thought they needed to do was to employ an architect to do what we called a specimen design. So we thought if we showed contractors what we thought good looked like, then we would hopefully inspire something better. So on the top here is the image that went into the hybrid build. I'm on record saying if they built that, I'm going to throw myself off of it. So I really had to do something about it. These are the designs that were called the specimen designs that were done by a fabulous architect for the same price, the same budget, and within the same programmatic recommendations. HS2 at first were like, oh no, we can't show that because, they might, they might think that that's what we want, or and it's like, yes, that's exactly why we have to show them that, because you have to visualize your aspiration, and eventually they published it, and the result was not that. The result was an extraordinarily beautiful design for the Colne Valley Viaduct, which I haven't shown you, but what I also want to do before I run over time is talk about the importance of collaborative design groups, so design teams working together. If you're not careful when you're designing big infrastructure projects, you design within the trace. You don't design beyond the red line. You think about it as a transport infrastructure. That is not what we need. By encouraging HS2 to think about and employing design teams, it's not difficult. It's not difficult to imagine that you need landscape designers. You need those who understand what biodiversity looks like, and you need a team of people who are going to turn what is an engineer's aspiration into something that actually works for people, is beautiful within its landscape, and really delivers on the design vision. The importance of having the design review process, I cannot tell you how important it's been to raise the aspirations of these big infrastructure projects, which is why I'm so completely passionate to make sure that happens in all of our infrastructure of national significance. The Quality of Life Foundation, I'm running out of time, I'm really sorry, is a foundation that I set up 2 years ago to improve the people's quality of life. We look at the absolute, what is the bread and butter of the built environment? What is it that you need to do to improve people's health and well-being and quality of life? We did a nationwide piece of research. No surprises, sense of control, sense of belonging, access to nature, sense of fun and wonder, so culture, freedom of movement, and healthy homes. And the work that we've been doing, and the reason I want to talk about that very briefly is because we're doing a nationwide piece of research which is asking communities what it is about their local places that matter to them, that improve their quality of life. It's the biggest digital consultation that's being undertaken in the UK, combined with the Urban Rooms Network. We will have a map of where people live and what's important for them, in order that then plays into whether it be developers that come along and or the local plans. I know I've run out of time, so I will stop there. But thanks. It's been really good fun to tell you about it. I wanted to say that the importance of advocacy, talking about design in places that you wouldn't normally do it, is so important. We have so much to offer in places that you wouldn't expect. And I hope very much that all of our big infrastructure, and when government approve of the recommendations that all infrastructure of national significance has design champions at board, you will all be on it. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you so much, Sadie. We did have a plan this afternoon that you'd be left always wanting more. I would now like to welcome to the stage Freya Murray, Creative Lead of Google Arts and Culture. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vicky, and thanks to London Design Biennale for having me here today. As I was preparing and thinking about what to talk about, and in the context of remapping collaborations, I started to reflect on the key ingredients I have found make a good collaboration, specifically collaborations at the nexus of art and technology, which is the focus of my work at Google Arts and Culture. And I kept coming back to three words: adaptability, openness, and curiosity. And so why do I think these three words, adaptability, openness, and curiosity, are key ingredients? I think when they truly come together, they can take a project in unexpected directions, and that's when often the magic happens. So at Google Arts and Culture, collaborations are kind of at our core. We build tools and technologies. We're a digital platform to explore culture across the globe. But all of it is only possible due to our partners. We have over 2,000 partners in over 80 countries. I lead our artist collaborations at our lab, which brings creative and tech communities together to explore and experiment at the not new but ever-evolving intersection of art and technology. And our collaborations often have many different starting points. I think what really excites me is when I am fortunate enough to facilitate a collaboration between people who may otherwise have never crossed paths. And when that creates something unexpected or realises a vision that might otherwise not have been possible. One of my favourite examples of this in a project I was involved of was with a master ceramicist and a 3D printing expert. It was back in 2017 at the CSMVS Museum in Mumbai. And we did a project together called Future Relics, which was a small part of a bigger exhibition called India and the World. The starting point of our involvement was looking at engaging and working and bringing kind of young people to interact in the exhibition. And the exhibition was around about the history of India and looking at actually reflecting on the present and looking ahead to the future. We invited visitors to respond to a question: what object would you like archaeologists to remember our present day by 100 years from now? And visitors responded in Hindi, Marathi, and English. And their contributions were translated live and mapped onto an evolving digital landscape of vases, which this is a visual showing that. We worked with a 3D printing studio called Emerging Objects to 3D print a collection of these vases with the most common contributions on, live at the museum so that people could come and watch. And they were live printed in clay. Now, I was really wanted to collaborate with a master ceramicist called B.R. Pandit. We wanted to combine his craft with the 3D printed pots. But we encountered a problem, an understandable problem. He was unsure about why and how he would collaborate with 3D printing. But luckily for us, he was also curious. And I'd just like to show you.
बनने के बाद इसको धीरे-धीरे सुखाया एक हफ्ते और सूखने के बाद भट्टी के अंदर 1215 बिस्किट किया, बिस्किट करने के बाद दोबारा फिर हम ग्लेड किया है, ग्लेड करने के बाद सिर्फ 1115 में फिर फायरिंग किया है। ये जो उभर कर आया है आगे पीछे, तो ये अभी मैं हाथ से चाक पर नहीं कर सकता, ये सिर्फ ये मशीन से हो सकता है।
The future art.
And so it was his curiosity and his openness that I think he was a really key collaborator on the project. And he brought, if we just go back a second, there we are. These were the finished pots. And it was his craftsmanship and his ability. So he brought his skill and he fired and glazed these pots. And now they're part of the museum's permanent collection. And yeah, and so moving on. What I'd also like to share with you is I'm really interested in when traditional crafts meets cutting-edge technology and the possibility of collaboration in this space. For the next project, we are going to go to Mali. In 2014, Dr. Hedera invited us to Mali for support to digitise the Timbuktu manuscripts, to preserve them for future generations. There are over 40,000 Timbuktu manuscripts, some written in the 11th century, and they contain science, religion, art, poetry, and much more. When the conflict began in 2012, these were at an increased risk of being destroyed. And these manuscripts, they haven't been stored in museums, but they've been kept by families as a secret, a way of protecting them over centuries. Most of them hidden in walls or buried in the ground. Dr. Hedera started to move as many manuscripts as possible out of Timbuktu to Bamako. We think about 95% of the manuscripts survived this incredible expedition. And some of them are also been damaged by time. And so, working with partners, we digitised so far 4,000 of these manuscripts. But there were many challenges encountered, and this project took 6 years and only recently came out into the public and was online. The challenges were working in terms of the community and communication and getting through to partners practically in a conflict-torn country. And working online was not easy or straightforward. There were many obstacles that had to be overcome, and it was only possible with the collaboration with our partners and their adaptability on the ground. The project started with manuscripts, but there was so much more to tell about the culture of Mali. And together with our partners, we couldn't stop just at the manuscripts. So we partnered with community leaders, local and international organisations and artists, and it grew to include monuments, art, music. For any of you who are rock lovers, Mali is where the blues plunged its roots. You can explore documentaries, virtual exhibits, high-res manuscripts, the first ever street view in Mali, and collaborations with artists. It was a vast project that took a number of shapes, and adaptability was required in the process. Now, the final project I'd like to share took an unexpected turn at its midpoint. We were collaborating with an interaction designer and artist called David Lee, and he was interested in exploring the question, what if we could play voice? He created something that was highly technically impressive, and initially it was known as AEIO Opera. Now, I just want to start by, so if you look at this visual behind me, and I want you to imagine that this block represents a voice. Let's say it's the alto. And if I was to now move this block around the bigger square, it would be harmonising in real time with other voices. Now, it really was what he'd created very, very impressive. But, as I'm sure you can all see, there was also a bit of a problem if we wanted people to engage with this. How could the tech be humanised? And so the blobs were born. And the blobs humanised the technology and allowed an interaction that felt more connected and intuitive than the single blocks. They are playful and quite endearing, and I think it's why millions of people of all ages have played with this blob opera. From teachers using it to teach music in the classroom, to TikTok challenges, to accompanying live performances. People really amaze me in continuing to find really creative ways to play with these blobs. But when the collaboration began, no one had any idea that it would end up at this point with this experiment. And I think it was really required from everyone involved a great deal of openness. So I think the unexpected is often where the magic happens. But often to embrace the unexpected, curiosity, openness, and adaptability is required. And I know at the start of every project, I need to constantly keep reminding myself of those key things. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Freya. So the last speakers in this session, we are delighted to have with us my former colleague, as Senior Curator of Fashion at the Biennale, Claire Wilcox, and Jayden Ali, founder of JA Projects, who worked together to create the Fashioning Masculinities exhibition currently on at the Biennale, but I think they're going to talk about that and other collaborations. Welcome.
Hello. Hi.
So we've talked a lot over the last few years, not always about the exhibition, but mainly about the exhibition. And I want to continue that conversation this afternoon, drawing on the energy of what's been gone before, but also thinking about how, was this sort of sounding okay? Thinking about what this conversation's led to and how my role as a curator, bringing you into the project, how we managed it together and how we move forward.
Amazing.
So I just want to explain a little bit about the exhibition. It has three main sections: undressed, overdressed and redressed. And in many ways, these sections form the sort of template for the show. And we're going to start off by talking about the first section, undressed, and here we have some images from this section. The idea was in some ways drawn from the V&A sculpture galleries. It was about stripping back fashion to the body, thinking about how the body, and the male body in particular, is fashioned over time through sort of realization of ideals, but also expressing a complete sense of diversity within the representation of bodies. And our first conversation, the first time we met, you showed some imaginings from the design brief.
Not all of them Claire liked.
I didn't like, but I did like what you did with Gallery 1. Would you talk about it?
Yeah, for sure. I think this slideshow is just going to run in the background, and you might see some of the same pictures again twice, but I suppose there was always a fragileness to Gallery 1, and maybe it's worth saying, when we were introduced to the project, it had been in Claire's mind for how long?
Years.
Yeah. So there was also a really fragile moment in introducing us to this project. And I think that was a moment, when we talk about collaborations, it's about how people find each other and how they are brave in welcoming other people into their space. And of course, I think he was looking for someone to resonate with and maybe kind of fill in the blanks, if you like. And that's our ambition for Gallery 1. It's really much of this project is a love letter to the museum, as Claire always told us. And I think that's a reflection on what the museum and the V&A is, and also a reflection on what the museum could be. And in that moment, we were presented with classical sculpture and ideas of antiquity, and what we always wanted to do as a kind of, in terms of design, is to enable people to reflect upon themselves and find themselves in the exhibition. And so we're trying to fill in those gaps in that moment. So you have these kind of ginormous sculptures that kind of lean over you and tower over you, and they're quite conventional. They're beautiful, but they're quite conventional, and I suppose we've wrapped them in an edifice, and maybe that was the images that you saw before. We wrap them in a kind of a surround of kind of other representation of other bodies, specifically black bodies in that moment. So there's a kind of a tonal quality to that room, which expands the canon a little bit. It's a little bit more kind of generous, and also allows people that spiritual moment that we wanted to create in that space.
No, very much so. I mean, you mentioned the sense of fragility and vulnerability, and that was something that was very, very important to us to sort of indicate through the design, but also the objects we chose. And I think, in a sense, it was like a second chance at an alternative V&A, a V&A where the presence of masculinities has been very present, but somehow, in terms of our fashion programme, menswear had never really been addressed. We'd never done a major show about menswear, and it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating, and I should say that there are many women in the exhibition sort of hidden in plain sight. But we felt that actually, I think I felt, you know, what you said about our meeting, and I'd been thinking about it for years. I'd always, I guess with every exhibition I ever do, I always imagine it as a tiny crystal clear entity far in the distance that I have to move towards, and it will get closer and closer, but always remain sharply in focus. And my self-appointed role is to convince everybody else that this is a good idea, to bring people along, to get approval from the steering group that makes decisions about exhibitions in the V&A, which luckily I'm on, so I could champion my own show. But to feel that as, first of all, the research team get involved, and then conservation, and then design, and then yourselves, and all the time to keep hold of this sort of crystal clear vision, but at the same time to be open enough to adapt it and to admit when I've got things wrong, or to understand that somebody else might have a better version of what I could see. And this is what you brought. And
Sometimes.
I should say that, strangely, when we were talking and I was looking at your portfolio, I was really more interested in what you were saying than what you were showing. And I think that listening to each other has been really important all the way through.
And on the subject of listening, I mean, there were a number of amazing conversations that we had when we interviewed for the role. I remember coming away thinking, Charlie, we must do this project, because we just spoke for 20 minutes about whether steel as a material had a gender. And I'd never expected that question in an interview. And similarly, another standout moment was this moment where we talked about the importance or the unimportance of voice. We had a design meeting, we had stuff to do, instead we spoke for an hour about voice in the museum. So you know, I think it's based upon good conversations at that moment, and that kind of completion of you've kind of sketched that essay at the beginning, and you've kind of, we're trying to fill in the gaps and complete it. I mean, the exhibition is in 3 phases, as Claire said. Did you want to say something about kind of the second film?
Yes, I mean, I, as always with the V&A, there's a sort of conflict between the elite. You know, we have a fantastic collection of elite fashion, and if we look at the 18th century menswear collections in particular, what was collected in the past was court clothing because it's glorious. So you have pink court suits embroidered with flowers from top to bottom, with ribbons and silks and velvets, and this was commonly worn at court. But then you have this sort of difficulty around only representing a very small portion of society through this clothing. So immediately you're tipped, and you can't do anything about it because you can't go back and recollect. So you have to think of ways of presenting it, the ways of interpreting it. And in the second gallery, where we're talking about excess, we're talking about abundance, amplification, we have to understand that the reasons behind that were very much connected with how masculinity was performed, but also the relationship between textile, pattern, floral motifs. These are all a result of global trade. We've got a fantastic portrait in the exhibition of a textile merchant wearing a very lavish silk waistcoat, which is embroidered with roses from Persia. And in a sense, by wearing this garment, he's asserting sort of agency over a decorative aspect, but also a natural aspect. And so you have these, you have a responsibility when you do a show like this to not just say this is very nice, but to say this is how it is because of these reasons. And your design helped us to frame those questions.
Yeah, and I think section 2, which you'll see after section 1, is a kind of a commentary on power and power embodied in pageantry. And so we chose to kind of enclose and showcase these beautiful objects in a kind of abstracted form of a big European country house with all of its kind of Rococo traits and its flamboyance that exists in that moment. But also, we were really interested in juxtaposition. So as you enter into that second sequence, you can hear the dull tone of West African highlife music, because it's not just the kind of regurgitation of the past. And there's a really critical moment in the exhibition which sits on a central axis where Claire had included Yinka Shonibar's kind of Diary of a Victorian Dandy, 5 p.m., I think, 1700 hours at that moment. And it's, if you don't know this artwork, it's kind of Yinka Shonibar standing draped in kind of red livery. He's a kind of disabled black man, empowered in this moment of theatricality. And we thought to kind of resonate with that quite literally. We have a 10-foot billiards table that takes its cue from the red livery of Yinka. And there was a brief moment when in the show, can I say that, where this work wasn't going to be in the show, and we had designed this table and it sits on the central axis and holds everything together. And that's because usually these artworks should be shown together.
Together, exactly. So we had to get special permission from the artist, and so we were able to show it on condition that we included reproductions of the other parts of the sequence, because he envisaged it as a whole, and it's inspired by Hogarth.
But it's kind of a prominence to that work in that space that sits alongside all of the other kind of agendas. It's about power in that moment. And there's another space, and just this image is really important because section 2 sits behind that, but that image showed kind of section 1 and section 3, which is kind of the final section before you get to the finale. And they're siblings, if you like. One is about antiquity and one is about modernity. Do you want to say something about the objects and the
Yes, I mean, I also wanted to, everyone's touched on the pandemic quite inevitably, and I think that it actually it's quite an important part of the journey we went through. For me, as a curator, there came a point when suddenly I couldn't go into the archive. I couldn't access the objects. And if I ever have a question or a problem, I always think the answer is in the object. I just go and look at a frock coat and it'll speak to me. And I couldn't do that. And so I had to rely on really bad images, which I discarded. And I decided to rely on my memory. And so I would sort of go into sort of dream state where I'd imagine going into Blythe Road, where our archive was stored, going upstairs, getting my keys, opening the cupboard doors and taking the garments out. And I could sort of imagine them and then, argue quite assertively, we have to have this, we have to have that. But all the time thinking, these are objects in my imagination, will they do what we need them to do? And luckily, when we installed them, which was the first time I'd been back into the museum for 18 months, was when we began to install. First time I met you in person as well. I thought, we're walking on a tightrope here.
I mean, there's so much risk embodied in this exhibition anyway, and one of the most risky moments I felt, or the bravest moments, is in section 3 where it's monochrome.
Monochrome, exactly.
Like all of the works, all of the objects are black or white. And you don't quite notice that until because the design kind of complements that. We needed to inject a level of colour to give it the palette that it needed, but it works so well.
Yes, again, I do remember arguing for a fashion exhibition that would end with monochrome, with no colour, and thinking it could be starkly beautiful. And here we are redressed, it begins here. Thinking that it could be starkly beautiful or it could not give enough. And I always feel a great sense of responsibility that the show should be, as well as stimulating, ask questions, touch on difficult subjects, which fashion can do as a bit of a Trojan horse. At the same time, I feel that the spectacle is important. And you brought it because you added dashes of orange in the panels to this monochrome landscape. So the black frock coats and the tuxedo suits and the contemporary fashion really, was given liveliness by this urban colour.
And it's worth saying that this is the only section that is chronological in any way. So it's really over the last 100 or so years. And so the paneling that you see, the kind of illuminated curtains, are a reflection on kind of the evolution of curtain walling in the metropolis. It's really based around the city.
Yeah, this is a perfect example.
And the orange is kind of representative of the luminescence that occurs when you heat glass at the incredible temperatures that you need to heat it to create this kind of the city and the cityscapes that we live in. So it's really a reflection on now, whereas if you see that as in contrast to section 1, it's really much about the earthy tones and the sandy tones and coming from slightly more kind of natural and humble materials.
I wanted to ask you, a few months on, how you feel about the show now when you go back into it?
I mean, quite honestly, I go in and I smooth out the walls and I kind of rub marks off. I really enjoy devouring the objects now. I go back periodically and I take time to just spend time in one section and just resonate with those objects because, of course, you're dealing with them in the kind of design process, but they were always incomplete. They never had the stories attached to them or the commentary attached to them, and now you're given that full picture, and that's a really enjoyable moment for me. So I try and take a step back. Of course, there's stuff that I like and there's stuff that I don't like as much. But on the whole, I think it's a really engaging journey, and obviously I watch people in the way in which they perform, and there's a moment in the finale which you're seeing this kind of moment occur here,
yes.
Which is there was always an ambition. The exhibition is bookended by an entry sequence, which is a bit of a palette cleanser, and a Craig Green suit, which is about kind of abstraction and maybe a fragmentation, and starts to kind of give you an insight into what might occur at the end of your journey. And then at the end, you're presented with the kind of plurality of fashion and masculinity in its forms.
Yes, I mean, we think a lot about thresholds, about how you go into an exhibition, what can be conveyed in those few short moments where you're trying to convey to the visitor something that's very complex that you've laboured on for years, and it seems very difficult. But actually, I've learnt over the years that a threshold, there can be many thresholds. There's a threshold to each section, but there's only one finale, and that's why it mattered so much. And I'm thinking we're probably out of time, but
so we'll end on
end on the finale. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll follow you down the stairs.